This is one of the most tragic cases in Liverpool's past, that of Florence Maybrick, sentenced to death in 1889 for having sex with a man who was not her husband. The events are very much of those times, and it centres on one of life's injustices, what men can get away with and what women can't. She was born in 1862 at her parents' mansion in Mobile, Alabama, and was the daughter of William and Caroline Chandler. He had once been the mayor and was a partner in the banking firm of St. John Powers and Company. Florence's father had died before she was born. Her mother remarried in 1872 to Baron Adolf von Rox, a cavalry officer in the 8th Cuirassier Regiment of the German Army. While travelling by ship to the United Kingdom in 1880, Florence met James Maybrick, a cotton merchant from Liverpool. Other passengers were either amused or shocked by a 17-year-old girl spending so much time alone in the company of Maybrick, who was 24 years her senior. He was addicted to drugs, including arsenic and strychnine. He also had all the prejudices of the English middle class. Freedom, he believed, was only a right for men like him. A year later, on the 27th of July, the couple were married at St. James's Church in Piccadilly, in London. They lived for 2 years in America, and now had a son and a daughter, and then moved into Battlecrease House, in the leafy suburb of Aigburth in Liverpool. Florence thought the city was something of a cultural backwater, and not long after the move, in 1887, Florence found out about her husband's second life. Despite her misgivings, she made quite an impression on the social scene, and the Maybricks were usually to be found at the most important balls and functions, the very picture of a happy, successful couple. But Maybrick, a hypochondriac, was a regular user of arsenic and patent medicines containing poisonous chemicals. In a paradoxical way, he believed that these substances made him stronger and increased his virility. This deadly misconception was widespread in Victorian England, with many medicines containing arsenic. He had a number of mistresses, one of whom lived in Whitechapel in London, and bore him 5 children. Florence, meanwhile, increasingly unhappy with her marriage, entered into several liaisons of her own. Florence's enthusiasm for her marriage continued to wane, and she began a relationship with a young Liverpool merchant called Alfred Briley. In March 1889, she spent 3 days in a hotel on Henrietta Street in London with Briley, who signed them both in as Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Maybrick. This was indiscreet to the point of recklessness. Around the same time, she started to inquire about procuring a divorce, and her husband James caught wind of the infatuation between Florence and Briley at the Grand National soon after. A violent row ensued after these reports of Florence's relationship with Briley, during which he hit her in the face, hard enough for a doctor having to be called, and announced his intention of seeking a divorce, which at the time between the two seemed to be mutual. James Maybrick fell ill on the 27th of April 1889 after self-administering a double dose of strychnine. His doctors treated him for acute dyspepsia, but his condition only got worse. On the 8th of May, Florence wrote what would turn out to be a compromising letter to Briley, which was intercepted by Alice Yap, the governess to the children. The contents made clear Florence's adultery and contained the infamous line, "James is sick unto death." Yap handed this letter with great delight to Edwin, one of James's brothers, and suspicion immediately fell on Florence. The governess hated Florence and intercepted all her letters that were sent and passed them on to James Maybrick's brother, Edwin, who was staying at Battle Crease at the time. Edwin himself, by many accounts, was one of Florence's lovers, and he shared the contents of the letter with his brother Michael, who also disliked Florence. By Michael's orders, Florence was immediately deposed as mistress of her own house, and held against her will, locked in her room without any charge being brought against her. The reasons why the house had united against her are unclear. Maybe they thought her adultery was evidence enough for something far more sinister, or maybe they just did not like her. On the 9th of May, a maid reported that Florence had surreptitiously tampered with a Valentine's meat juice bottle that was afterwards found to contain a half grain of arsenic. Florence later made a statement that her husband had begged her to administer it as a pick-me-up, but it was said that he never drank a drop of it. James Maybrick died on the 11th of May, after 3 weeks of suffering. In her memoir, Florence tells as she knelt down by her late husband's bedside, "Death had wiped out the memory of many things. I was thankful to remember that I had stopped divorce proceedings, and that we had become reconciled for the children's sake." The brothers of James, who were suspicious as to the cause of death, had a post-mortem done. It was discovered that the body contained slight traces of arsenic, but not enough to be considered fatal. It is uncertain whether this was taken by Maybrick himself or administered by another person. James's brothers and the staff at Battle Crease House continued to conspire against Florence. She had bought flypapers in April which contained arsenic and had been seen soaking them in water, presumably to extract the poison, in her bedroom by various members of the staff, including Yap. As the family cook testified during the inquest, there were no flies at that time in Battle Crease. The real reason for the purchase of the flypapers had been to use the arsenic for the treatment of acne, in a recipe Florence had learnt in Germany as a girl. The purchasing of the papers had not been a secret, and Florence had made no attempt to hide the soaking. She had assumed the purpose was obvious to all. During the medical examination after James's death, not a single fibre of paper was found in his medicine bottles or in his body. After an inquest held at a nearby hotel, Florence was charged with her husband's murder, and the case against her was first tested. There were 3 grounds for suspicion. Firstly, the changing of the labels on James's medicine bottles by Florence during his 2-week sickness. Secondly, she was accused of handling James's medicine that supposedly contained arsenic. And thirdly, the letter to Briley showing a motive of sorts. But the inquest also unearthed just as many suggestions of Florence's innocence. James's doctor testified that he was a habitual drug taker, swallowing large doses of arsenic on a regular basis. The family's cook described the accused's ceaseless work, looking after James during his final days. The toxicology report had exonerated her still further. The amount of arsenic in James's body was insignificant, and far less than the smallest recorded fatal dose. This small amount was easily explained by James's well-known addiction to the poison, and likely entered his body a long time before his illness. Florence stood trial at St George's Hall in Liverpool before Mr Justice Stevens. The fling with Briley had sealed Florence's reputation forever, in the eyes of the law and the press. When the judge sentenced her, he told the all-male jury that a woman who committed adultery was no better than a murderess anyway. The evidence, or lack of it, linking her to arsenic poisoning didn't matter much. Her fall was damning enough. Yet the press, as ever, did not let the facts get in the way of a good story. Much was made of Florence's beauty, and even more of her infidelity. Fears were stoked of the domestic silent assassin, the disloyal wife, who could easily do away with her balsam husband with a drop of arsenic. The room was silent during the judge's summing up. The trial had been a farce. It seemed impossible to Florence's barrister, Charles Russell, a future Lord Chief Justice, that any jury could convict someone with such little evidence. But then the judge spoke. "Members of the jury," he said, "your own hearts must tell you what it is for a person to go on administering poison to a helpless, sick man, upon whom she had already inflicted a dreadful injury, an injury fatal to married life. The person who could do such a thing as that must be destitute of the least trace of human feeling." The all-male jury, no doubt swayed by the judge's summing up, deliberated for 40 minutes. Morality, it would seem, triumphed over evidence, as their verdict was guilty. She was now convicted and sentenced to death. Her trial was reported in newspapers as being a miscarriage of justice, as the prosecution evidence was baffling and confused. After the verdict, crowds shouted in favour of Florence, believing she was being accused of a murder she had not committed. After an appeal, she was saved from the gallows by the Home Secretary, Henry Matthews, who ruled there were grounds for reasonable doubt as to whether the arsenic administered was the cause of death. The sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Queen Victoria was furious that so wicked a woman should escape by a mere legal quibble. For as long as she reigned, Florence would not see freedom. The case became something of a cause célèbre and attracted considerable newspaper coverage on both sides of the Atlantic. Arsenic was then regarded by some men as an aphrodisiac and a tonic, and Maybrick had certainly taken it on a regular basis. A local chemist confirmed that he had supplied Maybrick with quantities of the poison over a lengthy period of time, and a search of Battlecrease House later turned up enough to kill at least 50 people. Although her marriage was clearly over in all but name, Florence had little motive to murder her husband. The financial provision Maybrick had made for her and his children in his will was small, and she might have been far better off with him alive, but legally separated from him. Many people held the view that Florence had poisoned her husband because he was about to divorce her, which, in Victorian society, would see her ruined. An even more compelling motive might have been the prospect of losing the custody of her children. Following the reprieve of the death sentence, she was sent to Woking Female Convict Prison, where she remained until 1896, when she was transferred to Aylesbury Prison. She spent her first 9 months in solitary confinement, before being moved to a different cell, but remaining under a strict regime, where silence was enforced at all times. Her memoirs reveal the physical and mental toll that solitary confinement had on her. She is quoted as saying that this was by far the most cruel feature of English penal servitude, and emphasised her desolation and despair with the hopeless monotony of confinement, led her to feel. While in prison, she suffered from insomnia and frequent ill health. She had to endure hard labour, where she was allowed to leave her cell during the day to assist in carrying meals from the kitchen. Her day commenced at 6 a.m. and ended at 5:30 in the afternoon, during which she had to wash 10 forecourt cans, scrub one 20-foot table and two 12-foot dressers, clean knives, wash a sack of potatoes, assist in serving the dinners, and scrub a piece of floor 20 by 10 feet. She was in the prison infirmary for 2 weeks, suffering from a feverish cold, caused, she claimed, by inadequate clothing, bedding, and draughty cells. It was at the end of her time in the infirmary, on the 4th of November 1896, that she was transferred to Aylesbury Prison. Florence was released in January 1904, having spent 15 years behind bars. Although she had lost her US citizenship when she married her British husband, it was restored when she returned to her home country. Soon after her release, she wrote a book about her experiences, Mrs. Maybrick's Own Story, My 15 Lost Years. Initially, she earned a living on the lecture circuit, speaking on prison reform and protesting her innocence. In later life, she moved to Connecticut and used her maiden name, Florence Chandler. After some months spent unsuccessfully as a housekeeper, she became a recluse, living in a squalid 3-bedroom bungalow in Gaylordsville, a village in New Milford, with only her cats for company. A few sympathetic residents eventually discovered her true identity, but kept the secret. She died alone aged 79 and penniless on the 23rd of October 1941, and the next day her obituary was published at the top of page 1 of the New York Times. Among her few possessions was a scrapbook with newspaper clippings of her former life and a tattered family Bible. She never saw her children again. They were raised by the family's doctor. Her son, who became a mining engineer, died in 1911 of accidental poisoning when he mistook a cyanide solution for a glass of water. There is a strange postscript to this story. Just over 100 years after the trial, a diary, written, or maybe to look like it was written, by James Maybrick or one of his brothers, was found, possibly in Battlecrease House. The person who wrote it was, or was pretending to be, Jack the Ripper. Nobody knows for sure if the diary is genuine. It has been one of the most analysed documents in the world, and the fact it has not been declared a forgery gives it some credence.